The autumn morning
I'm
mist
so
still
glad we're
clung
here
to the
together
ancient stones
tonight.
of
It means
Windsor
the world for me to
Castle
share
when
this with
Prince
you.
William Arthur Philip Lewis stepped into what would become one of the most significant chapters of his preparation for kingship. At 43 years old, the heir to the British throne had weathered storms that would have broken lesser men. But nothing had quite prepared him for the weight of expectation that settled on his shoulders as September 2025 drew to a close. The year had been transformative in ways both painful and profound. As William stood in the grand reception room, adjusting his navy suit jacket while palace staff made final preparations, his mind wandered to the conversation he'd had with his wife Catherine just hours earlier. She had been getting ready for her own engagement, a flagship event for her early years' work, when she'd paused to place a gentle hand on his arm. "You're ready for this," she had said, her green eyes reflecting the certainty that William sometimes struggled to find within himself. More than ready. The meeting scheduled for that Monday morning represented far more than a diplomatic courtesy. His Royal Highness Sheikh Sabah al-Sabah, the Crown Prince of Kuwait, was arriving at Windsor Castle not just as a visiting dignitary, but as a peer who understood the peculiar burden of being groomed for ultimate responsibility while living perpetually in the shadow of the present ruler. William's relationship with Windsor Castle had always been complex. Unlike the grand formality of Buckingham Palace or the cozy domesticity of Amer Hall, Windsor possessed an almost mystical quality that seemed to amplify both the privileges and pressures of royal life. Here, in these halls where his grandmother Queen Elizabeth II had spent her final years, where his father King Charles III now increasingly conducted state business, while Buckingham Palace underwent its seemingly endless renovations, William felt the full weight of royal history pressing down upon him. The morning light streaming through the tall windows caught the dust motes dancing in the air, each one seeming to carry with it the whispers of centuries past. William thought of all the kings and queens who had walked these corridors, who had hosted foreign dignitaries in these very rooms, who had wrestled with the delicate balance between personal desires and public duty that defined royal existence. Sheikh Sabah's visit to the United Kingdom had been meticulously planned, following his appearance at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The Crown Prince had spent days in London, meeting with senior government officials to discuss strategic partnerships that spanned finance, infrastructure, and technology. These were the kinds of relationships that formed the backbone of modern diplomacy, built not just on historical ties, but on mutual economic interests and shared challenges in an increasingly complex global landscape. For William, however, this meeting represented something far more personal than trade agreements or diplomatic protocols. In recent months, he had found himself thrust more frequently into the role of his father's representative, a transition that had accelerated not by choice, but by necessity. King Charles's cancer diagnosis earlier in the year had reshaped the distribution of royal duties, with William stepping forward to fill gaps that protocol demanded be filled by senior members of the royal family. The burden of representation had never felt heavier than during the difficult months when both his father and his wife battled cancer simultaneously. William had confided to friends that 2024 had been the hardest year I've ever had, a rare moment of public vulnerability that revealed the human cost of royal stoicism. The heir to the throne had watched helplessly as the two people most central to his world faced their mortality, while he was expected to maintain the public facade of strength that his position demanded. Catherine's journey through preventative chemotherapy had tested not just her physical resilience, but the entire family's ability to maintain privacy in an age of relentless media scrutiny. The social media speculation about her whereabouts during her recovery had reached fever pitch, with conspiracy theories proliferating faster than palace communications could address them. William had found himself in the impossible position of protecting his wife's dignity while satisfying the public's demand for information about a future queen's health. The experience had fundamentally changed his perspective on the relationship between the royal family and the public they served. Gone were the days when palace walls could provide meaningful privacy. Every absence was noted, every appearance analyzed, every gesture interpreted as either a sign of strength or an admission of weakness. It was a reality that would only intensify when he eventually became king. As William waited for Sheikh Sabah's arrival, he reflected on the lessons of the past year. The cancer battles had stripped away any remaining illusions about the invincibility that royal mythology often suggested. His father, at 76, had shown remarkable resilience in continuing his duties while undergoing treatment, but the episode had served as a stark reminder that the throne waited for no one's convenience. The sound of approaching vehicles in the castle courtyard drew William from his contemplation. Through the window, he could see the formal motorcade that would deliver the Kuwaiti crown prince to Windsor's doors. It was a sight he had witnessed countless times, but today it felt different. Today, he was not simply the king's son attending a meeting. He was the future king hosting a fellow future ruler, engaging in the delicate dance of diplomacy that would define much of his reign. Palace protocol dictated every aspect of such visits, from the precise timing of arrivals to the careful choreography of greetings. Yet within these formal constraints, William had learned to find opportunities for genuine connection. His military background had taught him that the most meaningful relationships often formed not during the grand ceremonial moments, but in the quiet conversations that happened between the pageantry. The doors to the grand reception room opened, and William straightened his shoulders as palace staff announced the arrival of his guest. Sheikh Sabah al-Sabah entered with the composed dignity that marked him as a man comfortable with power, yet his warm smile suggested an understanding of the personal dimensions of their respective roles. "Your Royal Highness," Sheikh Sabah said, extending his hand as William stepped forward to greet him. "Thank you for receiving me at Windsor Castle. The beauty of this place matches its reputation." "The pleasure is entirely mine, Your Highness," William replied, his natural warmth overriding the formality of protocol. "My father sends his regrets that he could not be here personally, but he wanted me to convey his best wishes for your visit and his hope that our discussions will strengthen the bonds between our nations." The exchange of greetings was captured by the palace photographers who would later share carefully selected images on the Prince and Princess of Wales's social media accounts. These photos would tell only part of the story, showing handshakes and smiles, but unable to convey the deeper significance of this passing of diplomatic torches from one generation to the next. As they moved into the more intimate setting of the castle's private reception areas, both men seemed to relax slightly. Away from the formal camera positions and the watchful eyes of accompanying staff, they could engage more naturally in the kind of conversation that built real understanding between nations. William had spent considerable time preparing for this meeting, studying briefings not just about Kuwait's current political and economic landscape, but about Sheikh Sabah's personal background and interests. The Crown Prince had built a reputation as a modernizer within his own context, someone who understood the need to balance traditional values with contemporary realities. It was a challenge that William recognized all too well. The conversation naturally turned to the complexities of serving in roles defined by tradition while operating in a rapidly changing world. Sheikh Sabah spoke thoughtfully about Kuwait's efforts to diversify its economy beyond oil dependency, initiatives that required careful navigation between progressive policies and conservative constituencies. William found himself discussing his own Earthshot Prize, the environmental awards program that represented his attempt to use royal influence to address climate change while respecting the political neutrality that defined constitutional monarchy. Both men understood the unique pressures of being groomed for leadership from birth while having no choice in the matter. Unlike elected officials who sought power or business leaders who built their own empires, they had inherited roles that came with enormous responsibility, but little personal agency in accepting them. It was a bond that transcended national boundaries or religious differences. As the formal part of their meeting progressed, William found himself impressed by Sheikh Sabah's nuanced understanding of global challenges. The Kuwaiti Crown Prince spoke knowledgeably about technology partnerships that could benefit both nations, infrastructure projects that required careful international coordination, and financial innovations that reflected the changing nature of global commerce. These were conversations that would have been unimaginable to previous generations of royalty, when diplomatic meetings focused primarily on ceremonial expressions of friendship rather than substantive policy discussions. The modern reality of constitutional monarchy demanded that future rulers understand complex economic relationships and technological trends, even if their ultimate role would be to represent rather than govern. The meeting also provided William with an opportunity to practice the kind of statesman role that would define his future kingship. Unlike his father's generation, which had come of age during the Cold War when international relationships were often defined by clear ideological divisions, William's reign would require navigation of a multipolar world where economic interests, cultural exchanges, and technological cooperation created complex webs of interdependence. As their discussion continued through the morning, both princes seemed to recognize the historical significance of their meeting. They represented not just their current nations, but the future of international relationships between constitutional monarchies and traditional kingdoms. Their ability to work together would influence not just bilateral ties, but the broader question of how inherited leadership could remain relevant in democratic ages. The warmth that developed between the two men was genuine, built on shared understanding rather than diplomatic necessity. When Sheikh Sabah mentioned his hope to convey his respects to King Charles, William's response revealed both his filial devotion and his growing comfort with representing the crown in his father's absence. As the morning progressed toward its conclusion, William realized that something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of his role. This was not simply another diplomatic engagement to be completed dutifully. It was a glimpse into the future that awaited him as king. The responsibility was daunting, but for the first time in months, it also felt manageable. The success of the meeting would be measured not just in the positive coverage it generated or the diplomatic protocols it satisfied, but in the personal confidence it gave William about his readiness for the crown that awaited him. As he prepared to escort Sheikh Sabah through the castle's historic chambers, he felt the weight of royal expectations settling into something that felt less like burden and more like purpose. The transformation was subtle but significant. The man who had entered the grand reception room that morning as the king's son would leave it as someone who had successfully represented the crown in his own right, earning respect not just through his title, but through his personal conduct and diplomatic skill. It was a crucial step in the long journey toward kingship, one that would prove more important than either man could fully appreciate in the moment. As they moved through Windsor's corridors, William found himself seeing the castle differently. These were no longer just the halls where he had grown up visiting his grandmother, or the rooms where his father now conducted royal business. They were the chambers where he would someday serve as king, where future diplomatic meetings would be conducted under his authority, where the weight of the crown would rest on his shoulders rather than simply shadowing his steps. The morning had begun as a diplomatic obligation. It was ending as a personal revelation about the man William was becoming and the king he was destined to be. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the castle's courtyard as William escorted Sheikh Sabah through Windsor's historic corridors, each step carrying the weight of centuries of royal tradition. The formal meeting had evolved into something more intimate, a conversation between two men who understood the peculiar burden of inherited responsibility in ways that few others could comprehend. As they paused before a portrait of Queen Victoria, William found himself explaining not just the historical significance of Britain's longest-reigning monarch, but the personal lessons her reign held for constitutional monarchy in the modern era. Victoria had inherited the throne at 18, unprepared and inexperienced, yet had presided over an era of unprecedented British influence. Her example served as both inspiration and warning for future rulers. She learned to balance the ceremonial with the substantial, William explained, his voice carrying a thoughtfulness that revealed how deeply he had contemplated these precedents. The crown's influence came not from political power, which was already shifting to Parliament, but from moral authority and diplomatic relationships like the one we're building today. Sheikh Sabah nodded appreciatively, understanding that William was sharing more than historical trivia. These were the frameworks through which the future king was constructing his own understanding of royal purpose. The Kuwaiti crown prince had his own ancestral examples to draw upon, rulers who had navigated the transformation from tribal leadership to modern statehood while maintaining cultural continuity. The conversation naturally turned to the challenges of modernizing ancient institutions while preserving their essential character. Both men had witnessed firsthand how quickly public opinion could shift, how social media had accelerated the pace of criticism and praise alike. The mistakes of previous generations, once hidden by palace walls and deferential press coverage, now became viral sensations within hours. My generation of royalty faces scrutiny that our ancestors could never have imagined, William reflected as they moved through the state apartments. Every decision is analyzed, every gesture interpreted, every absence noted. The margin for error has essentially disappeared. This observation carried particular weight given the events of the past year. Catherine's cancer diagnosis and subsequent treatment had thrust the couple into the kind of media maelstrom that had previously destroyed royal lives. The conspiracy theories about her whereabouts, the invasive speculation about her health, the demands for information that balanced public interest against personal privacy, all had tested William's ability to protect his family while maintaining his public role. The experience had taught him hard lessons about the modern relationship between monarchy and media. Unlike his mother Diana, whose troubled relationship with press attention had ended in tragedy, William had learned to use social media strategically while maintaining firm boundaries around his family's privacy. The carefully edited video that would later be shared of Sheikh Sabah's visit represented this new approach, controlled transparency that satisfied public curiosity without sacrificing dignity. As the tour continued, Sheikh Sabah proved to be more than a gracious guest. He was an insightful observer of royal dynamics. Having watched his own family navigate the complexities of traditional leadership in democratic times, he understood the delicate balance William was attempting to achieve. His questions revealed a sophisticated understanding of constitutional monarchy's evolution. The challenge, Sheikh Sabah observed as they stood in St. George's Hall, is maintaining relevance without overstepping constitutional boundaries. Your father has mastered this balance, using his platform to address climate change and urban planning without entering partisan politics. William appreciated the observation's accuracy. King Charles had spent decades developing what historians would likely judge as a successful model for modern kingship. Engaged with contemporary issues, but politically neutral, visible without being controversial, traditional yet progressive. The cancer diagnosis that had temporarily reduced Charles's public appearances had thrust William into applying these lessons sooner than anticipated. The succession of recent events had accelerated William's transformation from heir apparent to heir active. Where previous generations might have waited decades for meaningful responsibility, William found himself representing the crown at diplomatic receptions, hosting foreign dignitaries, and speaking on behalf of British interests at international forums. The apprenticeship was happening in real time, under constant public observation. Their discussion moved to the practical challenges of royal diplomacy in an age of global uncertainty. Both men understood that their future relationships would unfold against a backdrop of economic competition, technological disruption, and cultural transformation that made traditional alliance-building more complex. The partnerships they developed today would need to survive political changes in both their countries. William's approach to these relationships reflected lessons learned from both success and failure in British diplomacy. His grandfather, Prince Philip, had built lasting friendships with foreign royals through shared interests in conservation and technology. His father had cultivated relationships with Islamic leaders that had proven invaluable during periods of cultural tension. William was developing his own diplomatic style, one that emphasized environmental collaboration and youth development. The Earthshot Prize, William's signature initiative, had become more than an environmental awards program. It had evolved into a platform for international cooperation. The competition brought together innovators from across the Commonwealth and beyond, creating networks of collaboration that transcended traditional diplomatic channels. Sheikh Sabah had expressed interest in Kuwait's participation, recognizing how environmental challenges required the kind of international coordination that royal relationships could facilitate. As they concluded their formal tour and moved to more private quarters for continued discussion, both men seemed aware that their meeting represented a passing of generational torches. The world they would inherit as leaders bore little resemblance to the one their fathers had known. Climate change, technological disruption, social media transformation, and global economic interdependence had created challenges that required new approaches to traditional problems. The conversation grew more personal as the afternoon progressed. Away from the formal protocol of staterooms, they could discuss the emotional costs of public service with unprecedented candor. Sheikh Sabah spoke movingly about the sacrifice of personal choice that defined their roles, the way constitutional requirements shaped every major life decision from career choices to marriage partners to where their children could attend school. William found himself sharing insights that he had rarely articulated even to close friends. The pressure of knowing that every action would be scrutinized not just for its immediate impact, but for its implications for the monarchy's future was overwhelming at times. The weight of representing not just his own reputation, but the institution itself in every public appearance required constant vigilance that could be emotionally exhausting. Yet both men also acknowledged the unique opportunities their positions provided. Few people in history had ever possessed the platform to influence global conversations about issues they cared deeply about. William's environmental advocacy reached audiences that elected officials could never access. Sheikh Sabah's modernization efforts in Kuwait had implications far beyond his nation's borders, providing a model for evolutionary rather than revolutionary change in traditional societies. The discussion of family challenges proved particularly meaningful. Both men had experienced the difficulty of raising children in the public eye, of providing normal childhoods while preparing future generations for extraordinary responsibilities. William spoke with evident pride about Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, describing his efforts to give them experiences that would ground them in everyday realities while preparing them for roles they had not chosen. The key is helping them understand service as privilege rather than burden, William explained. They need to see how their advantages come with responsibilities, how the platform they inherit can be used to make meaningful differences in people's lives. This philosophy reflected William's own journey toward accepting his destiny. The young man who had once rebelled against the constraints of royal life had evolved into someone who genuinely embraced his role's potential for positive impact. The transformation had not happened overnight. It was the result of years of experience, personal growth, and the sobering realization of mortality that had accompanied his family's recent health crises. As the afternoon drew toward evening, their conversation turned to the immediate future. Sheikh Sabah's visit to Windsor was concluding, but the relationship they had begun building would continue to develop through correspondence, future meetings, and collaborative initiatives. The personal connection formed during their hours together would provide a foundation for years of diplomatic cooperation. The success of their meeting could be measured in multiple ways. Officially, it had strengthened bilateral relationships between Britain and Kuwait, created opportunities for economic cooperation, and demonstrated the continuing relevance of royal diplomacy in democratic ages. Personally, it had given both men confidence in their ability to represent their nations effectively while building genuine friendships across cultural and religious divides. For William specifically, the day had provided crucial validation of his readiness for increased responsibility. The natural ease with which he had conducted the meeting, the substantive quality of their discussions, and the mutual respect that had developed between them suggested that his preparation for kingship was progressing successfully. As they prepared for Sheikh Sabah's departure, William reflected on how the meeting would be remembered. The photographs and video clips that would circulate on social media would capture only the formal aspects of their encounter: handshakes, smiles, and ceremonial exchanges. The deeper significance of their conversation, the personal bonds formed, and the foundations laid for future cooperation would remain largely invisible to public view. This gap between public perception and private reality was something William had learned to navigate with increasing skill. The modern monarchy's survival depended partly on maintaining mystique while demonstrating relevance, appearing accessible while preserving dignity, showing strength while acknowledging vulnerability. It was a balance that required constant adjustment. The day's success also highlighted the evolution in William's relationship with his father. Where once he might have deferred to King Charles's experience and judgment, he now felt confident making independent decisions about how to conduct royal diplomacy. The trust that Charles had shown in delegating such an important meeting to his heir represented both practical necessity and genuine confidence in William's abilities. As Sheikh Sabah's motorcade prepared to depart Windsor Castle, William stood in the courtyard watching the formal farewells. The protocols of departure were as carefully choreographed as those of arrival, but the warmth between the two men was genuine and unscripted. They had begun the day as diplomatic counterparts. They were ending it as friends who would maintain contact long after the official visit concluded. The evening that followed would be quiet by royal standards. William would return to his family, sharing dinner conversation that mixed discussions of the day's diplomatic success with the ordinary concerns of children's homework and weekend plans. This ability to transition between the extraordinary and the mundane had become one of his most valuable skills. Later that evening, as Windsor Castle settled into its nighttime routines, William would stand once again at the windows of his private quarters, looking out over the grounds where so much royal history had unfolded. The day had marked another step in his long preparation for kingship, another successful navigation of the challenges that awaited him as future head of state. The man who would someday be king was learning to carry the weight of crown and country with increasing confidence, supported by personal relationships that transcended diplomatic necessity and sustained by a growing understanding of service as both privilege and responsibility. 3 weeks after Sheikh Sabah's departure from Windsor Castle, the ripple effects of that successful diplomatic encounter were still being felt throughout the corridors of power in both London and Kuwait City. William had received a gracious cable of thanks from the Kuwaiti Crown Prince, expressing not only appreciation for the formal courtesies, but genuine enthusiasm for the collaborative initiatives they had discussed during their private conversations. The meeting had accomplished far more than the traditional diplomatic objectives of strengthening bilateral relationships and reaffirming historical ties. It had demonstrated William's growing mastery of the delicate art of royal diplomacy, his ability to balance ceremonial obligations with substantive policy discussions, and his skill at building personal connections that transcended the formal requirements of state protocol. In the weeks that followed, William found himself reflecting on how dramatically his role was evolving. The shy young man who had once struggled with public speaking was becoming a confident representative of British interests on the global stage. The transformation was not merely personal. It reflected the changing nature of monarchy itself in the 21st century. The success with Sheikh Sabah had not gone unnoticed at Buckingham Palace. King Charles, despite his ongoing health challenges, maintained close oversight of his son's diplomatic activities. The positive reports he received about William's conduct during the Kuwaiti visit reinforced his confidence in gradually transferring more substantial responsibilities to his heir. It was a delicate process, one that needed to respect both constitutional protocols and personal relationships within the royal family. The broader implications of William's diplomatic success became apparent during the annual diplomatic reception at Windsor Castle in November. For the first time since 2001, this glittering white tie and tiara event was held at Windsor rather than Buckingham Palace, a change necessitated by the ongoing renovation work at the traditional venue. The relocation provided symbolic weight to William's growing association with Windsor as a center of royal authority. More than 900 members of the diplomatic corps gathered in Windsor's state apartments for the reception, representing one of the largest and most diverse diplomatic communities in the world. As heir to the throne, William played a central role in the evening's proceedings, moving effortlessly between conversations with ambassadors, high commissioners, and cultural attaches from across the globe. Catherine's absence from the reception was noted but understood. Her gradual return to public duties following her cancer treatment was being carefully managed, with each appearance strategically chosen to maximize impact while respecting her recovery needs. William's solo performance at such a major diplomatic event demonstrated his ability to carry the monarchy's international relationships independently when necessary. The evening provided William with opportunities to follow up on relationships he had been building throughout the year. His conversation with the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United Kingdom, Badr Abdullah Al-Munaik, revealed how effectively his meeting with Sheikh Sabah had advanced bilateral discussions about technology partnerships and infrastructure cooperation. The personal connection William had established with the Crown Prince had created momentum for practical collaboration that went beyond ceremonial friendship. Similar conversations throughout the evening highlighted William's growing network of international relationships. His environmental advocacy through the Earthshot Prize had created entry points with diplomatic representatives from nations across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. These were not casual social connections, but working relationships that could influence policy discussions and international cooperation for years to come. The diplomatic reception also showcased William's evolution as a host in his own right. Unlike earlier years when he had attended such events primarily to observe and learn, he now took active leadership in ensuring that guests felt welcome and that conversations served both social and strategic purposes. His natural warmth, combined with his deepening knowledge of international affairs, made him an increasingly effective representative of British interests. Queen Camilla's choice of the Greville Emerald Kokoshnik tiara for the evening drew attention from royal watchers, particularly because of its strong association with Princess Eugenie's wedding in 2018. The selection reflected the practical realities of royal jewelry management. These historic pieces were meant to be worn and appreciated, not left to gather dust because of sentimental associations. For William, such decisions represented the kind of diplomatic sensitivity he would need to master as future head of the royal family. The success of the diplomatic reception reinforced William's reputation as someone who could seamlessly blend tradition with contemporary approaches to international relations. The formal protocols of such events remained unchanged: the white tie dress code, the careful choreography of introductions, the ceremonial toasts that honored diplomatic relationships. Yet within this traditional framework, William was conducting the kind of substantive conversations that built real partnerships. This balance between tradition and innovation had become a hallmark of William's approach to royal duties. His military background had taught him to respect established procedures while adapting to changing circumstances. His experience as a helicopter pilot with the Air Ambulance Service had shown him the importance of teamwork and crisis management under pressure. These lessons were proving invaluable as he assumed greater responsibility for representing British interests abroad. The month of November also brought news that would reshape William's future responsibilities even further. Catherine's announcement that she was in remission from cancer, combined with William's hint that she might undertake overseas travel in 2025, suggested that the couple would soon be able to resume the kind of international tours that had been such an important part of their public role before her illness. The prospect of returning to overseas travel represented both opportunity and challenge for William. Previous tours to countries like Australia, Canada, India, and various Caribbean nations had established him as an effective ambassador for British values and interests. His natural ability to connect with people from diverse backgrounds, combined with Catherine's warmth and fashion diplomacy, had made them one of the monarchy's most valuable diplomatic assets. Yet the experience of the past year had changed their perspective on international travel and public duties. The health scares that had affected both Catherine and King Charles had reinforced the fragility of plans and the importance of maintaining flexibility in royal scheduling. Future tours would need to balance diplomatic objectives with family considerations and health management in ways that previous generations had not needed to consider. William's growing diplomatic confidence was also evident in his preparation for the upcoming German state visit in December. For the third time in 2025, he and Catherine would be placed at the center of a major diplomatic event, greeting President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and his wife Elke Buitenbender at Heathrow Airport before accompanying them to Windsor Castle for 3 days of official engagements. This pattern of positioning William and Catherine as the welcoming face of British diplomacy represented a significant evolution in royal protocol. Previous generations had typically reserved such visible roles for the monarch and consort, with heirs apparent playing supporting rather than central roles in state visits. The decision to feature William and Catherine so prominently reflected both practical considerations, King Charles's reduced travel schedule, and strategic recognition of their effectiveness as diplomatic representatives. The German state visit would be particularly significant given the historical complexities of Anglo-German relations and the contemporary challenges facing European cooperation in the post-Brexit era. President Steinmeier's visit, the first by a German president in 27 years, provided opportunities to rebuild relationships that had been strained by Britain's departure from the European Union. William's preparation for the visit reflected his growing sophistication in understanding the multiple layers of modern diplomacy. Beyond the ceremonial elements of state banquets and formal receptions, he was engaging with the substantive policy discussions about trade relationships, security cooperation, and cultural exchanges that would define Anglo-German relations for the next generation. The success of his hosting of Sheikh Sabah had given William confidence that he could manage the personal relationships that often proved more important than formal agreements in building lasting diplomatic partnerships. His ability to find common ground with leaders from different cultural and political backgrounds was becoming one of his most valuable skills as a future head of state. This diplomatic evolution was taking place against the backdrop of broader changes within the royal family. Prince Andrew's decision to relinquish his Duke of York title and withdraw further from public life had removed another potential source of diplomatic embarrassment while creating additional space for William to expand his role. The streamlined monarchy that King Charles had long advocated was emerging not through deliberate planning but through circumstances that required adaptation. William's growing prominence in diplomatic affairs also reflected changing public expectations about royal relevance. Modern audiences were less interested in ceremonial appearances for their own sake and more focused on evidence that royal duties served practical purposes in advancing British interests. William's ability to conduct substantive policy discussions while maintaining the dignity and tradition associated with monarchy provided a model for royal effectiveness in democratic societies. The feedback from diplomatic partners had been consistently positive. Foreign officials appreciated William's preparation for meetings, his knowledge of their country's specific challenges and opportunities, and his ability to engage with complex international issues without crossing constitutional boundaries into partisan politics. These skills would be essential as he prepared for eventual kingship. As 2025 drew toward its close, William found himself in a position his younger self could hardly have imagined. The reluctant prince who had once been uncertain about his role's relevance was becoming a confident statesman who understood how constitutional monarchy could serve contemporary purposes. The personal growth had been hard-won, forged through family crises and public scrutiny that had tested his resilience and commitment. The transformation was not complete. William knew that full preparation for kingship would require years more experience and continued learning. Yet the foundation was solidly established. He had proven his ability to represent British interests effectively, build meaningful relationships with international partners, and adapt royal traditions to contemporary requirements without sacrificing their essential dignity. The young man who had hosted Sheikh Sabah with such success was ready for whatever diplomatic challenges lay ahead, confident in his growing mastery of the complex art of royal statesmanship. The crown that awaited him was looking less like a burden to be endured and more like an opportunity to serve in ways that his unique position made possible. The future king was finally beginning to understand not just what he would inherit, but what he could accomplish with that inheritance. The December morning that would forever change William's understanding of his constitutional role began with an unexpected conversation in his father's private study at Windsor Castle. King Charles, looking healthier than he had in months despite ongoing cancer treatment, had summoned his heir for what appeared to be a routine briefing about the upcoming German state visit. The meeting would prove to be far more significant than either man initially anticipated. William, the king began, settling into the leather chair that had been his father Prince Philip's favorite. We need to discuss your role not just in this week's visit, but in the fundamental evolution of how this monarchy will function in the coming decades. The gravity in his father's voice immediately captured William's attention. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved from the traditional father-son dynamic into something approaching a true partnership between current and future sovereigns. The cancer diagnosis had accelerated this transition, forcing both men to confront the reality that the transfer of ultimate responsibility might happen sooner than anyone had planned. Charles continued, his words carefully chosen to convey both the weight of tradition and the necessity of adaptation. The success of your diplomatic initiatives, particularly your handling of the Kuwaiti Crown Prince's visit, has demonstrated something that I believe represents the future of constitutional monarchy. You're not simply preparing to inherit a role, you're actively reshaping what that role means for the 21st century. This observation touched on something William had been contemplating privately for months. The traditional model of monarchy, where heirs apparent waited decades for meaningful responsibility while observing from the sidelines, seemed increasingly obsolete in an age of instant communication and rapid political change. The public expected their future king to be actively engaged with contemporary challenges rather than merely prepared for eventual succession. The conversation that followed would reshape William's understanding of his position within the constitutional framework that governed British democracy. Charles explained his vision for a more collaborative approach to royal duties, one where the heir apparent would gradually assume increased responsibilities not just in ceremonial functions, but in the substantial aspects of sovereign authority. The German state visit will serve as a demonstration of this evolution, Charles explained. While I will retain ultimate authority as head of state, you and Catherine will serve as the primary representatives of British interests throughout most of the proceedings. This arrangement reflects both practical necessity and strategic preparation for your future role. The implications of this shift were profound. Previous heirs apparent had typically participated in state visits as supporting figures, learning through observation while their monarch parent maintained central authority. William would instead be conducting substantive diplomatic discussions, making commitments on behalf of British interests, and representing the crown in ways that required both constitutional knowledge and political sophistication. This evolution reflected broader changes in how constitutional monarchy functioned in modern democratic societies. The traditional model, where monarchs served primarily as ceremonial figureheads while elected governments conducted all substantial business, was giving way to a more nuanced arrangement where royal influence operated through relationship building, moral authority, and diplomatic continuity that transcended electoral cycles. William's environmental advocacy through the Earthshot Prize provided a perfect example of how this new model could function. His ability to convene global leaders around climate challenges did not depend on political authority, but on the unique platform that constitutional monarchy provided. The initiative operated entirely within democratic constraints while achieving policy influence that elected officials often struggled to match. The discussion between father and son also addressed the delicate balance between increasing William's responsibilities and maintaining constitutional propriety. The British system required that all substantial political authority remain with elected officials, yet the monarch's role as head of state necessarily involved activities that could influence policy outcomes. William was learning to navigate this balance with increasing sophistication. The key, Charles emphasized, is understanding that our influence operates through persuasion rather than compulsion, through relationship building rather than command authority. The power of the crown in democratic society lies not in what we can force others to do, but in what we can inspire them to accomplish. This philosophy had guided Charles's own approach to kingship, allowing him to advocate for environmental protection and urban planning while maintaining political neutrality. William was adapting these lessons to contemporary challenges, using his platform to address issues like mental health, homelessness, and climate change without crossing constitutional boundaries. The German state visit would provide a practical demonstration of how this evolved role might function. President Steinmeier's visit carried significant political implications for Anglo-German relations in the post-Brexit era, requiring diplomatic sensitivity that balanced British interests with European partnership opportunities. William's ability to conduct these discussions effectively would demonstrate his readiness for the increased responsibilities that awaited him. Their conversation also touched on the personal dimensions of constitutional evolution. Both men understood that the monarchy's survival depended partly on public perception of royal relevance and effectiveness. William's growing comfort with substantive diplomatic engagement reflected not just personal development, but institutional adaptation to changing public expectations. The generation that will live through your reign expects their sovereign to understand contemporary challenges in ways that previous monarchs rarely needed to consider, Charles observed. They want evidence that royal duties serve practical purposes rather than merely preserving historical traditions. This expectation created both opportunities and pressures for William. His military service and emergency response experience had given him credibility in ways that purely ceremonial preparation could not match. His genuine engagement with issues like veteran support and mental health advocacy demonstrated personal commitment that resonated with public opinion in ways that formal royal duties alone might not achieve. The conversation naturally turned to Catherine's role in this constitutional evolution. Her gradual recovery from cancer treatment and planned return to increased public duties in 2025 represented more than personal triumph. It reflected the monarchy's ability to adapt to unexpected challenges while maintaining essential functions. Her approach to royal duties, particularly her focus on early childhood development, provided a model for how modern royalty could address substantive policy issues while respecting democratic boundaries. Catherine's work on early years development has achieved policy influence that rivals anything accomplished by elected officials, Charles noted with evident pride. She has demonstrated how royal advocacy can advance important causes without undermining democratic authority. This approach will become even more important as you both assume greater responsibilities. The partnership between William and Catherine represented a significant evolution from traditional royal marriage dynamics. Where previous generations had typically seen royal spouses as supporting figures who enhanced their partner's ceremonial functions, William and Catherine operated as a team that combined complementary expertise to advance shared objectives. Their joint approach to royal duties reflected contemporary partnership expectations while respecting constitutional requirements. As their discussion continued, Charles revealed his broader vision for monarchical evolution during William's eventual reign. The streamlined monarchy he had long advocated was emerging not through deliberate planning but through circumstances that required adaptation. Prince Andrew's withdrawal from public life, the natural aging of senior royals, and changing public expectations were creating space for a more focused royal presence that emphasized effectiveness over ceremony. Your generation of royalty will operate with fewer family members sharing public duties, which means greater responsibility, but also greater opportunity to shape the monarchy's direction, Charles explained. The reduced numbers require more strategic thinking about how royal influence can best serve national interests. This observation reflected practical realities that would define William's future reign. Unlike his father's generation, which had included multiple siblings and cousins in active royal roles, William would likely operate with a smaller core family undertaking public duties. The necessity of maximizing impact with fewer resources would require sophisticated planning and execution. The German state visit would serve as a testing ground for many of these evolving approaches to royal duty. William and Catherine's central role in welcoming the German president, their conduct of bilateral discussions, and their representation of British interests would provide evidence of their readiness for increased constitutional responsibility. Beyond the immediate diplomatic objectives, The visit would also demonstrate how constitutional monarchy could adapt to contemporary international relations. The personal relationships William and Catherine built with their German counterparts could influence policy discussions for years to come, yet their effectiveness would depend on respecting democratic processes rather than circumventing them. As their conversation drew toward its conclusion, Charles addressed the emotional dimensions of constitutional evolution. Both men understood that the transition from heir apparent to sovereign represented more than professional advancement. It involved fundamental changes in personal identity and family relationships. The gradual increase in William's responsibilities was preparing him not just practically but emotionally for the weight of ultimate constitutional authority. The crown will never be merely another job, Charles reflected. It represents a form of service that shapes every aspect of personal and family life. The preparation you're receiving now will prove invaluable when you face the full weight of sovereign responsibility. This preparation extended beyond formal constitutional knowledge to include the emotional resilience necessary for effective leadership under constant scrutiny. William's experience during Catherine's illness and his father's cancer treatment had tested his ability to maintain public composure while managing private anxiety. These experiences had strengthened his understanding of the personal costs of public service. The meeting concluded with Charles formally authorizing William to represent British interests at the highest levels during the German state visit. This delegation of authority represented both practical necessity and institutional confidence in William's growing capabilities. The success or failure of the visit would reflect directly on William's readiness for increased constitutional responsibility. As William left his father's study, he carried with him a new understanding of his evolving role within the British constitutional framework. He was no longer simply preparing to inherit a position. He was actively participating in the evolution of constitutional monarchy for the modern era. The responsibility was daunting, but the opportunity to shape the monarchy's future direction provided a sense of purpose that transcended personal ambition. The man who would someday be king was learning to see constitutional duty not as burden but as opportunity, not as constraint but as platform for meaningful service. The German state visit would provide another crucial test of his growing mastery of the complex art of constitutional leadership in democratic society. The final weeks of 2025 found William standing at the precipice of a transformation that would define not only his personal future, but the trajectory of the British monarchy itself. As he prepared for the German state visit that would serve as perhaps the most significant test of his diplomatic capabilities to date, he carried with him the accumulated wisdom of a year that had fundamentally altered his understanding of royal duty and constitutional responsibility. The morning of December 3rd brought unseasonably crisp air to London as William and Catherine made their way to Heathrow Airport to greet President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and First Lady Elke Buitenbender. This was their third major state visit welcome of 2025, following successful receptions for French and American delegations earlier in the year. Yet something about this particular occasion felt different, charged with significance that went beyond diplomatic protocol. Catherine's presence beside him represented its own triumph of resilience and determination. Her gradual return to public duties following cancer treatment had been carefully managed, with each appearance strategically chosen to demonstrate both her recovery and her continued commitment to royal service. The decision to include her in the airport welcome ceremony reflected not just her personal strength, but the partnership that had become central to William's approach to his evolving role. As their motorcade approached the airport, William reflected on how dramatically his perspective on royal duty had evolved over the course of the year. The reluctant prince who had once questioned the relevance of constitutional monarchy in democratic society had become a confident statesman who understood how inherited leadership could serve contemporary purposes. The transformation had been neither quick nor easy, forged through personal challenges that had tested his resilience and public responsibilities that had demanded his growth. The airport ceremony itself was a masterclass in modern diplomatic choreography. As the German delegation descended from their aircraft, William and Catherine stepped forward with the natural grace that had become their trademark, their warmth genuine despite the formal constraints of protocol. President Steinmeier's response to their greeting revealed the effectiveness of their approach, diplomatic professionalism enhanced by personal authenticity that created immediate rapport. The drive to Windsor Castle provided opportunities for informal conversation that would prove more valuable than any formal meeting agenda. William's preparation for the visit had extended far beyond briefing papers and diplomatic protocols to include genuine understanding of German perspectives on European cooperation, economic partnership, and cultural exchange. His questions during the journey revealed sophisticated knowledge that impressed his guests and established credibility for the substantial discussions that would follow. Catherine's contributions to these conversations demonstrated her own evolution as a diplomatic partner. Her focus on early childhood development had given her expertise in social policy areas that transcended national boundaries, providing common ground with international partners who faced similar challenges in their own countries. Her natural warmth and genuine interest in others created an atmosphere where formal diplomatic discussions could develop into meaningful relationship building. The 3 days that followed would showcase everything William and Catherine had learned about effective royal diplomacy. The state banquet at Windsor Castle on their first evening provided a perfect stage for the kind of cultural diplomacy that constitutional monarchy could uniquely offer. The setting itself, the same state apartments where William had hosted Sheikh Sabah months earlier, reinforced the continuity of British diplomatic tradition while allowing for contemporary adaptation. Catherine's appearance at the banquet drew international attention, not merely for her fashion choices, but for what her presence represented. The lover's knot tiara she wore had been a favorite of Princess Diana, its selection providing subtle acknowledgement of historical continuity while demonstrating Catherine's confident claim to her role as future queen. Her conversation with international guests revealed growing sophistication in cultural diplomacy that complemented William's political and environmental expertise. The success of the banquet extended beyond ceremonial achievement to substantive diplomatic progress. William's speech, delivered with confidence that would have been unimaginable even a year earlier, articulated a vision for Anglo-German cooperation that balanced respect for historical relationships with realistic assessment of contemporary challenges. His ability to address complex issues like Brexit implications and European security cooperation while maintaining constitutional neutrality demonstrated mastery of royal diplomatic requirements. The subsequent days of the state visit provided opportunities for William to demonstrate the full range of skills he had developed as heir apparent. His conduct of bilateral meetings revealed understanding of economic relationships, security challenges, and cultural exchange opportunities that impressed both German and British officials. These were not merely ceremonial encounters, but working sessions that advanced practical cooperation between the two nations. The private moments during the visit proved equally significant. William's tour of Windsor Castle for President Steinmeier included historical explanations that revealed deep understanding of constitutional development and diplomatic tradition. His comfort with discussing the evolution of monarchy in democratic society reflected intellectual engagement with his role that went far beyond dutiful acceptance of inherited responsibility. Catherine's parallel engagements during the visit showcased her independent contributions to royal diplomacy. Her meetings with German officials working on early childhood development created opportunities for policy exchange that transcended traditional diplomatic channels. Her genuine expertise in these areas provided substance that enhanced ceremonial functions with practical collaboration. The visit's conclusion brought recognition from both German and British officials that something significant had been accomplished. Beyond the traditional measures of diplomatic success, signed agreements, positive media coverage, and enhanced bilateral relationships, the visit had demonstrated the continued relevance of constitutional monarchy in modern international relations. William and Catherine had proven their ability to serve as effective representatives of British interests while maintaining the dignity and tradition associated with royal office. The success of the German state visit came against the backdrop of broader changes within the royal family that would define William's future reign. Prince Andrew's formal relinquishment of his Duke of York title had removed a source of ongoing controversy while creating space for increased focus on the working members of the royal family. The streamlined monarchy that King Charles had long advocated was emerging through circumstances that required adaptation rather than deliberate planning. These changes reinforced the centrality of William and Catherine's partnership to the monarchy's future effectiveness. With fewer family members undertaking public duties, their ability to cover diverse areas of royal responsibility became even more important. Their success in combining individual expertise with collaborative partnership provided a model for royal effectiveness in contemporary society. As 2025 drew toward its close, William found himself in a position of unprecedented confidence about his future role. The year had tested his resilience through family health crises, challenged his diplomatic skills through high-stakes international encounters, and demanded his growth through increased constitutional responsibility. He had responded to each challenge with developing sophistication that impressed both supporters and skeptics of monarchical relevance. The man preparing to become king understood himself and his role in ways that his younger self could never have imagined. The shy prince who had once struggled with public attention had become a confident statesman who could represent British interests on the global stage. The reluctant heir who had questioned royal relevance had evolved into someone who understood how constitutional monarchy could serve democratic purposes while preserving valuable traditions. Catherine's parallel journey from commoner to confident royal partner had provided crucial support for William's development while demonstrating her own commitment to effective public service. Their marriage had evolved into a true partnership that combined complementary strengths to advance shared objectives. Their joint approach to royal duty reflected contemporary expectations while respecting constitutional requirements. Looking toward 2026 and beyond, William could envision a future where his unique position allowed for meaningful service in addressing global challenges that transcended traditional political boundaries. His environmental advocacy through the Earthshot Prize had demonstrated how royal influence could advance important causes without undermining democratic authority. Similar approaches to other issues offered opportunities for continued relevance and effectiveness. The crown that awaited William no longer appeared as burden to be endured, but as opportunity to serve in ways that his unique position made possible. His understanding of constitutional monarchy had evolved from dutiful acceptance of inherited responsibility to enthusiastic embrace of service possibilities that could benefit both Britain and the broader global community. The challenges ahead remained substantial. Public expectations of royal relevance would continue to evolve, requiring constant adaptation without loss of essential dignity. International relationships would demand sophisticated navigation of competing interests and cultural differences. Family responsibilities would need to be balanced with public duties in ways that protected both personal relationships and institutional effectiveness. Yet William approached these future challenges with confidence earned through successful navigation of recent tests. The diplomatic skills he had developed through encounters with leaders like Sheikh Sabah and President Steinmeier would serve him well in future international relationships. The constitutional understanding he had gained through increased responsibility would prepare him for the full weight of sovereign authority when it eventually fell to him. As the final days of 2025 passed, William reflected on the transformation that had taken place not just in his personal capabilities, but in his understanding of what constitutional monarchy could accomplish in the modern world. The year had been marked by personal trials and public triumphs that had tested every aspect of his preparation for eventual kingship. The future king who emerged from these experiences was fundamentally different from the uncertain young man who had once questioned his role's relevance. William now understood that his position offered unique opportunities for service that could benefit both his nation and the broader global community. The crown that awaited him represented not just inherited privilege, but earned responsibility for advancing causes greater than personal ambition. The boy who had been born to be king had finally become the man ready to serve as one, prepared for the weight of the crown by experiences that had tested his character and developed his capabilities. The transformation was complete, yet the service it would enable was only beginning.